I'm Virginia Gill, 65 years old, and for the last 10 years, I've been raising my son's 4 children like they're my own, after my husband passed. I thought I'd spend my later years quietly tending my small house here in Columbus, Ohio, joining the quilting circle at church, maybe traveling a little with my neighbor Doris. But instead, I became the one holding my son's family together. Rodney and his wife, Rosemary, were always too busy. He worked long hours in construction, and she picked up shifts at the hospital. But the truth is, when they came home, they wanted to rest. And resting for them meant handing the kids off to me. So I cooked their meals, checked homework, got them to school, tucked them in. I kept the house running while they floated in and out. I thought it was temporary, that I was just giving them a head start. But months turned into years, and those years turned into a routine I couldn't break. I told myself I was doing it out of love, and I do love those kids. But slowly, I realized I wasn't living my life anymore. I was living theirs. Then one evening, everything shifted. They invited me to dinner. A full Sunday spread, roast potatoes, even a cake on the counter. I thought maybe it was their way of saying thank you, that after all this time, they finally saw how much I'd given. The kids were loud as usual. Sophie, the oldest at 14, was trying to keep her brothers from knocking over the juice pitcher, and the youngest, Elsie, was already climbing into my lap before I'd even sat down. I smiled at them, tired but proud. I've held them through sickness, taught them to read, cheered at their little plays. In many ways, they feel like mine. But then, midway through dinner, Rosemary set her fork down and gave Rodney that look, the kind that says, "Go on, tell her." Rodney tapped his glass with a spoon like it was some grand announcement. "Mom," he said, eyes shining, "we've got big news. Rosemary's pregnant. Baby number 5 is on the way." The kids froze, then erupted in chatter. "Another baby? When? Is it a boy or girl?" Rosemary leaned back in her chair, glowing, her hand resting on her stomach. Rodney beamed with pride. And me? My whole body went cold. I forced a smile, but inside, my heart was pounding. Another baby. A 5th. I'd already given up so much. My quilting group, afternoons with friends, even little trips I'd dreamed of taking. I was tired down to my bones. And now there would be one more child who needed diapers, bottles, endless care. I wanted to be happy for them. I wanted to clap like the kids did. But instead, a knot formed in my stomach, because I knew exactly what this meant. They would lean on me even harder. More babysitting, more school runs, more nights when I was the one rocking a crying infant while the parents slept. Rosemary looked at me, waiting for a reaction. "Isn't it wonderful, Virginia?" I nodded. My mouth said, "Congratulations," but my heart screamed, "No more." Dinner carried on, but I didn't taste a bite. My mind was racing too fast. I thought about my tiny pension, stretched thin from buying groceries and school supplies. I thought about the doctor telling me to take it easy with my back, and how I ignored him because someone always needed me to lift or carry. I thought about the stack of books on my nightstand I hadn't touched in years. I drove home that evening in silence. When I stepped into my little house, the quiet hit me. For the first time all day, I could hear myself think. I sat down at the kitchen table and stared at my hands, worn from years of doing dishes, folding laundry, and holding babies that weren't mine to raise. And that's when it hit me. If I didn't put my foot down now, I would spend the rest of my life raising children that weren't mine. I'd already lost a decade. How many more years would slip through my fingers before I realized I had nothing left? I love my grandkids. That will never change. But love doesn't mean giving up everything you are. That night, I made a decision, a quiet one at first, but strong. I was done being the family's safety net. I was done letting my son and his wife pile their choices on my shoulders. I realized if I didn't take a stand, I'd lose the rest of my life. And what I did next shook our family to the core. The next morning, my alarm rang at 6, though I hadn't slept much. I pulled on my old sweater, made a cup of coffee, and sat for a moment in the silence of my little house. But I knew it wouldn't last long. My phone buzzed with a text from Sophie. "Grandma, can you come? Mom's running late again." So I set down my mug and drove across town. By the time I arrived, the kitchen was already a mess. Bowls crusted with cereal sat on the counter. Milk pooled on the floor where someone had spilled and walked off. Rosemary's purse was open on the table, receipts and wrappers spilling out, but she was nowhere to be seen. Rodney had left before sunrise for work. Sophie, only 14, was trying to keep her brothers on track. Dylan, 11, was searching for clean socks. Caleb, 8, was digging through the fridge for something sweet. Little Elsie clung to my leg, still in her pajamas, her hair wild. I set my bag down and got to work. I packed sandwiches, poured juice boxes, and cut apples into slices. I ironed Dylan's shirt while reminding Caleb to brush his teeth. I braided Elsie's hair and tied her shoes. By 8 o'clock, I had hustled them out the door and into the car. The drive to school was noisy. Sophie complaining about a history project, Dylan tapping his pencil against the window, Caleb asking questions about baseball, Elsie humming to herself. I kept one hand on the wheel, the other gripping my coffee like it was the only thing holding me together. After dropping them off, I stopped at the grocery store. My Social Security check doesn't stretch far, but the kids needed things: new notebooks, laundry soap, fruit for lunches. I pulled out my debit card and prayed it wouldn't overdraw. I'd told myself a dozen times I should stop buying extras, but the thought of sending them to school with nothing gnawed at me. So I kept covering the gaps, dollar by dollar. When I got back to their house, laundry baskets were stacked high. I loaded the washer, folded shirts, matched socks. The hours passed in chores. The dishwasher ran twice before lunch. I wiped sticky fingerprints off doors and vacuumed crumbs from the carpet. It wasn't until late afternoon that I sat down for the first time. My back ached, and my hands felt stiff. I pulled out my notebook, where I used to sketch quilting patterns. Before Rodney's kids came along, I had joined a quilting group at my church. We'd meet every Thursday, laugh, share fabric scraps, and stitch together blankets for families in need. Those nights gave me joy, something to look forward to. But I hadn't been in 2 years. Every time there was a meeting, someone needed me to babysit. The same went for the walking club Doris invited me to. 3 mornings a week, a group of women from the neighborhood walked the path around the park, talking about grandkids' health recipes. I went once. I loved it. But then the kids had a stomach bug, or Rosemary had to stay late at the hospital, or Rodney asked me to cover bedtime. And so I stayed, again and again. By 3 o'clock, it was time to pick the kids up from school. The noise in the car was the same as the morning. Dylan teased Caleb, who threw his backpack at him. Sophie plugged in her headphones and tried to block everyone out. Elsie cried because she dropped her toy. My head pounded, but I kept driving. Back at the house, homework began. Sophie asked for help with algebra. Dylan needed supplies for a science project due tomorrow. Caleb had lost another permission slip. Elsie refused to eat the chicken I'd cooked. Through it all, I kept moving. I cut poster board for Dylan, checked Sophie's equations, hunted through Caleb's room for the missing slip. I reheated the chicken, then cleaned the plates when Elsie still wouldn't touch it. By the time the sun set, I was spent. I tucked Elsie into bed, sang the lullaby she loved, and smoothed her hair until she drifted off. Sophie lingered in the hallway, earbuds out, her face soft. "Thanks, Grandma," she whispered. My heart squeezed because I knew she saw what her parents refused to. It was after 9 when Rodney and Rosemary finally came home. He kicked off his boots and turned on the television. She set her bag on the table and scrolled through her phone. Not once did they ask how the day went. Not once did they thank me. I stood there in the kitchen, wiping my hands on a towel, watching them. They were relaxed, carefree, like the house ran itself, like the children raised themselves, like I was invisible. That night, as I drove back to my own place, I thought about the balance of things. I lived on less than $1,500 a month after Medicare and bills. I stretched every dollar, but somehow I still bought shoes when Dylan outgrew his pair, or a jacket when Sophie needed one. Meanwhile, Rodney and Rosemary ordered takeout twice a week and posted pictures of weekend trips on Facebook. It burned in me, not because I begrudged them happiness, but because I knew the cost of it. Their comfort was built on my sacrifice. By the time I pulled into my driveway, my body was heavy with exhaustion. My house was dark and quiet, the way I once craved. But instead of peace, I felt hollow. I set down my keys, sat at the table, and whispered out loud what I hadn't dared admit to anyone yet. I love those kids, but I feel like they're unpaid housekeeper. And that truth sat with me all night, pressing down harder than any chore ever had. A few days after that long night, I went back to Rodney's house. As usual, the kids had after-school clubs, and Rosemary asked if I could help cover the gaps. That was nothing new. I expected the same routine: snacks, homework, baths. But when I walked in that evening, something was different. Rodney and Rosemary were both home, sitting at the kitchen table. They looked serious. I set my purse down and asked if everything was all right. Rodney cleared his throat. "Mom, we need to talk about the baby." I froze. My hands tightened on the back of the chair. I already knew I wouldn't like where this conversation was heading. Rosemary folded her arms. "With number 5 on the way, things are going to get harder. We'll need more help. A lot more." I let the words hang there for a moment. More help. As if I wasn't already doing enough. As if my mornings, afternoons, and nights hadn't been swallowed whole by their kids for years. Rodney leaned forward. "We've been talking. You're already here most of the time, and the kids depend on you. Maybe it's time to make it official." I frowned. "Official?" Rosemary jumped in. "You should plan to take over more of the childcare once the baby arrives. I'll be recovering, and Rodney will have to keep working. You can handle the school runs, the meals, the laundry." It makes sense. My chest tightened. I thought about the church quilting group I hadn't seen in 2 years, the walking club that met without me, the stack of books by my bed. I had given up everything, and they wanted more. I swallowed hard. I already do all of that. I'm here every day. What else do you think I can give? Rodney glanced at Rosemary, then back at me. "You live here half the week anyway. Maybe it's time you pitch in for rent and groceries. Just a few hundred a month. That would help us out." The room spun for a moment. My Social Security check was barely enough to cover my utilities, food, and medications. Every month, I budgeted down to the last dollar. And yet I still bought their kids' shoes when they needed them, paid for field trips, picked up cereal and milk without asking for a dime back. Now, they wanted me to pay them, too. I shook my head. I live on a fixed income. I can't afford to pay rent here. I already help with the kids, and I buy things they need. Rosemary's tone sharpened. "You eat meals here. You use the space. It's only fair." Fair. That word stung. Was it fair that I gave up my time, my money, my health to hold their family together? Was it fair that I carried their load while they posted pictures of nights out? I didn't say all of that. I just pressed my lips together and let the silence sit heavy. Rodney leaned back, arms crossed. We're not asking for the world, Mom. Just a little more commitment. Think about the kids. They need stability, and you've always been the one to give it. The guilt slid in like a knife. He knew how much I loved those children. He knew I would do anything for them. He was using that love to tie me tighter to their house, their choices, their responsibilities. But beneath the guilt, something else stirred. Anger and fear. Anger that they saw me as nothing more than a convenient babysitter with a wallet. Fear that if I gave in, I'd never get out. I try to keep my voice calm. I've done my best for years. I've sacrificed more than you realize. I'm tired. I need to think about my own life, too. Rosemary rolled her eyes. Your own life? You're retired. What else do you have going on? That cut deep. I wanted to say, my life matters. My time matters. I am more than your nanny. But the words lodged in my throat. Instead, I picked up my purse. I need to go. I drove home with tears blurring my vision. My little house greeted me in silence, but the weight of their words followed me inside. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the bills stacked neatly in a pile, the pill bottles lined up by the sink. My budget didn't stretch enough for me to pay their rent. My body didn't have the strength to keep carrying their home. But then I thought of Sophie leaning on me for guidance, Dylan needing help with his projects, Caleb still small enough to crawl into my lap, Elsie asking me to braid her hair every morning. I couldn't imagine leaving them. And that was the trap. Love for them chained me to a life that was draining me. I poured myself a glass of water, my hands shaking. I looked around my quiet house, the one place that was still mine, and realized how close I was to losing even that. The thought hit me with full force. If I kept this up, I'd die before I ever lived for myself again. And once that truth sank in, there was no going back. The days after that talk were heavy. Every time I walked through Rodney's door, I felt the shift. Before, I told myself I was helping out of love. Now, I could see how much they expected, how much they had started to take for granted. One morning, Rodney cornered me in the kitchen. The kids had just left for school, and I was rinsing dishes. He leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "Mom, you've been acting different," he said. "Your attitude lately, it's not good for the kids." I stared at the suds swirling down the drain. Attitude, Rodney, I'm tired. I've been running your house while you and Rosemary are gone. I think I've earned the right to be tired. He shook his head, like I was being dramatic. "We just need you to be supportive. That's all." Then he grabbed his keys and left. Supportive. That word stung. Did he not see everything I already did? Later that afternoon, when I came back from picking the kids up, I noticed a piece of paper on the counter. Rosemary had written out a list in her neat handwriting. Fold laundry, clean fridge, take Caleb to practice, pick up Elsie's prescription, start dinner by 5. At the bottom she'd added, "Thanks, Mom. You're a lifesaver." I stood there holding the list, my jaw tight. It wasn't a thank you. It was instructions, like I was their hired help. Except I wasn't being paid. I was paying with my time, my energy, my health. The kids, though, saw things differently. Sophie had started coming to me late at night, sitting on the edge of my bed when I stayed over. "Grandma, can you help me with this paper? Mom never checks." Or, "Grandma, will you come to my recital? I don't think Dad will." Dylan, too, had begun looking to me before he looked to Rodney. "Grandma, can you sign this form? Grandma, will you come to the game?" Even Caleb, only 8, started asking me questions kids usually say for their parents. "Grandma, why doesn't Mom ever eat with us?" I never knew how to answer. I would pat his shoulder and say, "She's busy, honey, but I'm here." It broke my heart and swelled it at the same time. They trusted me. They leaned on me. But every question, every request was another reminder of how much their parents had stepped back. The crack between me and Rodney grew wider after one Saturday morning. I had agreed to watch the kids overnight, so they could catch up on errands. The kids and I had baked muffins together, and the kitchen was full of crumbs and laughter. When Rodney came home the next day, instead of smiling, he frowned at the mess. "Mom, you should keep things more organized. The kids need structure." I bit my tongue so hard I could taste blood. I'd spent 2 days keeping his house running, and all he saw was a messy counter. That evening, when I got home to my little house, Doris was sitting on her porch next door. She waved me over. I must have looked worn down because she said, "What's wrong, Virginia? You look like you're carrying the world." I sat beside her, the cool air easing my hot face, and spilled everything. How Rodney and Rosemary were pushing me to do more, how they'd asked me for rent money, how I felt more like a maid than a mother. Doris listened without interrupting. When I finally stopped, she leaned back and said, "You raised your kids, Virginia. You did your job. This isn't your job." Her words hit me like a bell ringing in my chest. I'd said the same thing to myself before, in little whispers, but hearing it out loud from someone else made it real. I shook my head. "But the grandkids, they need me. They need their parents," Doris said firmly. "Loving them doesn't mean you have to lose yourself. Don't you deserve a life, too?" I looked out at the street, the sun low, the kids on bikes calling to each other. For years, I hadn't let myself picture what life could be if I stepped back. But that night, sitting with Doris, I started to imagine, what if I said no? What if I didn't show up every morning before dawn? What if I spent my days at my quilting group or walked with the club around the park or even took a trip to visit my sister in Florida? The thought scared me. It felt selfish, but it also felt like breathing for the first time in a long while. That night, when I lay down in my own bed, the weight of it all pressed on me. The kids leaning on me, Rodney complaining about my attitude, Rosemary's lists of chores. It was building into something I couldn't ignore. The cracks were showing, and for the first time, instead of patching them with guilt and silence, I let myself imagine walking away. After that talk with Doris, I couldn't shake the thought of what life might look like if I stepped back. The cracks in Rodney's house weren't mine to patch anymore. For the first time in years, I began to wonder what it would feel like to live on my own terms. One afternoon, while the kids were at school, I drove to the public library. I told Rodney I was running errands, but really I wanted time to myself. I found a computer tucked in the corner and typed in senior apartments near me. Dozens of listings popped up. Small one-bedroom units, some for independent seniors, some attached to community centers. Prices made me gulp, most around $1,100 or $1,200 a month. My Social Security check wouldn't stretch that far, not without help. But I also saw notes about income-based housing. The idea planted a seed. Maybe I could manage it if I budgeted carefully. I scribbled down phone numbers and addresses in my notebook, feeling a flicker of hope I hadn't felt in years. Before I left, I wandered over to the job postings board near the library entrance. Flyers for part-time work covered the cork. Desk aide at the senior center, cashier at the grocery store, tutoring kids after school. None paid much, but even a few $100 extra might tip the scale. On the drive home, I kept picturing myself unlocking the door to my own space, knowing it was mine, and mine alone. No lists from Rosemary, no lectures from Rodney, just peace. That night, I tested the waters. After putting Elsie to bed, Rosemary mentioned she and Rodney wanted to go out next Friday. "You'll stay overnight, right? We'll be late." I looked her in the eye, steady for once. "No, Rosemary. I can't stay overnight anymore." I'll help in the afternoons, but I need my evenings back. Her eyebrows shot up like I'd slapped her. What do you mean you can't? You're here most nights anyway. I shook my head. Not anymore. I need to take care of myself. The silence that followed was thick. She didn't argue, but the look on her face told me she would run straight to Rodney, and I knew there would be words later. Still, when I got home, I felt lighter. One small boundary, but it was mine. The next day after school, Sophie lingered while the others scattered to play. She watched me fold laundry, her face more serious than usual. "Grandma," she said quietly, "are you okay?" I paused, my hands on a stack of shirts. "Why do you ask, sweetheart? You look so tired all the time," she whispered, like sad tired. "Is it because of us?" My heart broke right then. I pulled her into a hug. "Oh, honey, no. It's not you. You and your brothers and sister are the joy in my life. It's the grown-ups who need to step up, not you." She sniffled into my shoulder. "I just don't want you to leave." I held her tight. "I will always be here for you, but being here doesn't always mean living under the same roof. Do you understand?" She nodded slowly, though her eyes were shiny with tears. I kissed her forehead and promised, "You'll never lose me, Sophie, but I need to take care of myself too." That night, when I drove home, I knew the time for imagining was over. I had to act. I pulled out my notebook and started crunching numbers. My Social Security check came in at about $1,450 a month. My bills, utilities, medication, groceries ran about $1,100. That left maybe $350. Not enough for rent on my own. But if I picked up a small part-time job, maybe 15 hours a week, I could add another $400 or $500. That, plus careful budgeting, might make it possible. I circled the listings I'd written down from the library. I thought about my quilting group, the walking club, even the idea of visiting my sister in Florida. Life I had once set aside came back to me in flashes. It wasn't selfish. It was survival. The kids needed parents, not a grandmother who gave up her own life to fill in the cracks. And I needed more than endless laundry and late-night babysitting. By the end of the week, I'd made my choice. I was going to find a place of my own. It scared me to think about the argument that would come when I told Rodney and Rosemary. I knew they would push back, maybe even guilt me, but I couldn't ignore the truth any longer. I closed my notebook and said out loud into the quiet of my kitchen, "I must move out. It's the only way I'll ever live again." And in that moment, for the first time in years, I felt like I was finally steering my own life. I thought I had time to figure things out quietly. I planned to call the senior apartments the next week and maybe ask about part-time openings at the senior center. But word travels fast in families, especially when people are looking for reasons to control you. One evening after supper, Rodney and Rosemary called me into the living room. The kids were upstairs. The television was off, which told me this wasn't just casual talk. Rodney's jaw was tight. "Mom, we heard from Sophie that you've been looking at apartments. Is that true?" My heart sank. I hadn't planned to tell the kids yet. Clearly Sophie had let something slip. I folded my hands in my lap and said, "Yes, I've been looking. I need my own space." Rosemary crossed her arms. "So, you're just going to leave? With a new baby coming? Do you have any idea what that will do to these children?" I felt the sting in her words, but I kept my voice steady. "I've given more than 10 years to helping raise them. I've done the best I can, but I need to take care of myself." Rodney's face darkened. "You're being selfish, Mom. The kids love you. They depend on you. And now you're going to walk out when they need you the most." I swallowed hard. "No, I'm not abandoning them. I'll still be their grandmother, but I've raised one family already. I won't raise another. The words surprised even me. They came out firm, with a strength I hadn't felt in a long time. Rosemary leaned forward, her eyes sharp. Do you even realize how much we count on you? Who's going to get them to practice? Who's going to help with homework? Who's going to make dinner when I'm working and Rodney's at the job site? You can't just decide you're done. I looked between them and shook my head. You're their parents. That's your responsibility. Rodney let out a bitter laugh. Easy for you to say. You've been comfortable here, living off us, eating our food, not paying your share. That cut deep. Comfortable? My back ached from bending over laundry. My hands were raw from dishes. My small pension went to their kids' shoes and groceries. I opened my mouth, then shut it again. There was no point trying to convince them. I stood up slowly. I've made my decision. I'll help as a grandmother, but I won't be your full-time nanny anymore. The room went silent. The only sound was Rosemary tapping her nails on the arm of the chair. Finally, she said, "If you walk away, don't expect to just come back when it's convenient. The kids will see who really cares about them." Her words hit like a blow. I felt my throat tighten, but I forced myself to stand tall. I care. That's why I've stayed this long. But caring doesn't mean giving up everything I have left. Rodney muttered under his breath, "Unbelievable," and walked out of the room. Rosemary stayed, glaring at me like I was a stranger. I went upstairs and sat on the edge of Sophie's bed. She looked up from her homework, worry all over her face. "Grandma, are you leaving?" I brushed her hair back, gently. "I'm not leaving you, sweetheart. I'm just moving into my own place. I'll still be in your life, just not under this roof." She nodded slowly, biting her lip. "I wish Mom and Dad saw what you do for us." I kissed her forehead. "That's not your burden to carry. Remember that." Later that night, I went back to my house. I pulled out a suitcase and set it in the corner of my bedroom. I didn't start packing right away, but the sight of it there gave me a strange peace. I knew I was moving towards something I needed. Over the next week, I started tucking little things into the bag. My quilting needles, the photo of my husband and me on our wedding day, a small Bible that had belonged to my mother. I didn't want to make a scene. I just wanted to be ready. But somehow Rosemary noticed. One evening, as I folded a sweater into the suitcase, I heard the front door slam and footsteps on the porch. When I opened the door, there she stood, arms crossed. "So it's true," she said flatly. "You're really planning to go?" I didn't answer right away. I just met her eyes. She shook her head. "You're choosing yourself over your family. You'll regret it." I wanted to tell her regret was what I already lived with. Regret over the years I'd lost. But before I could, she turned and walked away. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, wondering how things had gotten this twisted. I had given so much, and still they saw me as selfish. I thought their words would hurt the most, but what they did next nearly broke me. Family turning against you hurts in ways strangers never could. If you've ever been accused of being selfish for finally saying no, click like. Subscribe if you believe women deserve to reclaim their lives. And if you think I was wrong to stand up for myself, tell me why in the comments. I knew Rosemary wouldn't let things rest after catching me with that suitcase. Still, I didn't expect how far she'd go. It started the following week. I had gone over to pick Sophie up from her choir rehearsal. When we pulled into their driveway, Rodney was standing on the porch with his arms crossed. His face was red, and Rosemary hovered behind him, her lips tight. "Mom," Rodney called out as soon as I stepped out of the car, "we need to talk." I could tell by the tone it wasn't going to be good. Sophie froze beside me, clutching her music folder. Inside, they didn't waste time. Rosemary stood by the counter, pointing to an envelope. "We had cash in here, $300. It's gone. And it disappeared right after you started packing." My stomach dropped. I stared at her, stunned. "You think I took your money?" Rodney's eyes narrowed. "You're the only one who's been around. If you needed help, you could have asked, but don't sneak it." Heat rose in my face. "I would never steal from you. Never. I've been the one buying groceries and shoes for years. And you know it." Rosemary's voice sharpened. "Then explain where it went." Before I could answer, Rodney added, "Maybe we should call the police. Let them sort it out." Those words cut deeper than anything they'd said before. My own son, talking about calling the police on me, his mother, after everything I had given, after every hour, every dollar. This was what they thought of me. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. My throat closed up. Then, out of nowhere, Sophie's voice broke through. She stood in the doorway, her face pale but steady. "Grandma didn't take anything," she said firmly. "She's the only one who ever gave us stuff." The room went silent. She looked straight at Rodney. "You know that, Dad. She buys our shoes. She pays for my field trips. She even bought Elsie's backpack when you said we had to wait." Rodney shifted uncomfortably. "Sophie, but she didn't stop. That money? Mom, you spent it at the store last week. I saw you put the envelope in your purse when you came home with groceries. Don't say you forgot." Rosemary's mouth opened, then closed. Her face flushed, but she didn't answer. Sophie's eyes filled with tears, but she held her ground. "Don't lie about Grandma. She's the only one who's always here for us." The silence that followed was heavy. Rodney looked at the floor. Rosemary busied herself by folding a towel that didn't need folding. Nobody spoke. Finally, I found my voice. "I don't deserve this. I've given everything I could. And now you accuse me of stealing." Rodney mumbled. "We were stressed, money's tight," but the excuse sounded weak even to him. I picked up my purse. "I think I should go." Sophie rushed to my side. "I'm coming with you." I hugged her, my heart breaking. "No, sweetheart, you stay here. It's not your fight." She shook her head, her small frame trembling. "It feels like it is." I kissed her forehead. "Thank you for speaking up. You were braver than I've ever been." When I stepped outside, the cool air hit me like a wave. My hands shook as I unlocked the car. Inside, I sat for a moment, gripping the wheel, trying to steady my breath. I felt vindicated. Sophie had spoken the truth, and the lie had crumbled. But I also felt hollow, because the truth was out, and still my own son had doubted me enough to threaten police. On the drive home, my thoughts twisted in circles. Part of me wanted to scream, to go back and unload years of anger. Another part of me just felt empty. You can only give and give before something inside finally breaks. When I pulled into my driveway, Doris was outside watering her plants. She waved, then saw my face and set the hose down. "What happened?" I told her everything. The accusation, Rodney's words, Sophie's courage. By the time I finished, my voice shook with exhaustion. Doris shook her head. "That's low, Virginia. Lower than I thought they'd go. But you know now, don't you? They'll keep taking until you draw the line." I nodded slowly. I thought their words would hurt the most. But hearing my son suggest calling the police on me, that nearly broke me. I went inside, closed the door, and leaned against it. For the first time in a long while, I felt both lighter and lonelier. The lie had fallen apart, but so had something inside me. And deep down, I knew there was no going back to how things were. Imagine being threatened with the police by your own child. Would you forgive, or would you finally walk away? Share this story. Subscribe if you believe no grandmother should be treated like this. The weeks after that blow-up felt strange. For the first time in years, my mornings were quiet. I moved into a small, one-bedroom apartment on the edge of town. It wasn't much, just a kitchen, a living room, and a tiny balcony, but it was mine. I bought a second-hand table from the thrift store and put my husband's photo on top. My quilting bag sat in the corner, waiting for me to pick it up again. The quiet at night felt heavy at first, but slowly it became comforting. No children arguing over cereal. No laundry piles reaching the ceiling. Just me, a cup of tea, and peace. I was learning to breathe again. I still saw the grandkids when I could. Sophie called often, sometimes just to tell me about a new song she was practicing. Dylan asked me to look over his science project through video chat. Caleb showed me the Lego tower he built. And little Elsie held up her drawings to the screen, proud as can be. It wasn't the same as being there, but it reminded me I was still part of their lives. And I needed that reminder because guilt has a way of creeping in when you finally step back. Then one Tuesday afternoon, my phone rang. It was Rodney. I almost didn't answer, but something told me to pick up. "Mom," he said, his voice tight. "It's Rosemary. She's in the hospital. Complications with the pregnancy. The kids, they're a mess. I don't know what to do." For a moment, I couldn't speak. After everything, after the accusations, the threats, here he was calling me again. A part of me wanted to hang up, but another part, the part that loved those children, knew I couldn't. "What kind of complications?" I asked. "She's on bed rest. The doctor says she can't be up and moving around. Could be weeks, maybe months. The kids still need to get to school, eat, keep the house going. I can't do it all." I sat at my little table, my heart pounding. The old pattern tugged at me. Step in, fix it, carry it all. But I also remembered Doris's words. "You raised your kids. This isn't your job." I took a deep breath. "I'll help Rodney, but only on my terms." He was quiet. "What do you mean?" "I'll support the kids, but I'm not moving back in. I'll keep my apartment, and I'll only do this for 3 months. After that, you and Rosemary need to manage." I could almost hear his jaw clench through the phone. But finally he muttered, "Fine, 3 months." The next day, I drove over after my morning coffee. The kids were scattered around the house. Sophie trying to calm Elsie, Dylan digging through the fridge, Caleb lying on the couch with his shoes still on. The place looked like a storm had hit. Sophie ran to me, her eyes wide with relief. "Grandma, thank goodness. Dad's been running back and forth, and Mom's not here. We didn't know what to do." I hugged her tight. "It's all right, sweetheart. We're going to get through this. But listen to me, I can't stay here full time. I'll be here to help after school, but I go home at night. Understand?" She nodded quickly. "We just need you, Grandma, even for a little while." That afternoon, I started setting things in order. I made a simple dinner of pasta and green beans. Then sat everyone down. "We're going to make this work as a team. Sophie, you help Dylan with his homework. Dylan, you're in charge of taking the trash out. Caleb, you set the table. Elsie, you put the napkins down." They looked at each other, a little uncertain, but they did it. And for the first time, I saw them realize they could carry some of the load themselves. When Rodney came home later, exhausted, I told him the same thing I'd told the kids. "I'll help, but only until Rosemary is back on her feet. And I will not give up my own life again." He didn't argue, maybe because he knew he had no choice. The days that followed were busy, but different than before. I picked the kids up from school, helped with dinner, and made sure the house didn't fall apart. But at 9 o'clock sharp, I headed back to my apartment. I slept in my own bed, woke in my own space, and kept my independence. There were moments when guilt whispered in my ear, telling me I should do more. But then I remembered the hollow feeling of those years I gave away. I couldn't go back to that. One evening, as I was leaving, Sophie walked me to the door. Grandma, are you sure you'll come back tomorrow? She asked softly. I bent down and held her hands. Yes, but remember, this is only for a short time. 3 months. After that, you and your brothers and sister will have to help your mom and dad more. I'm not going to let my whole life disappear again. She looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. I get it. You've already done enough. Her words warmed me in a way I can't explain. She saw me. She understood. That night, when I returned to my apartment, I sat on the balcony with a cup of tea. The city lights flickered in the distance. For the first time, I felt balance, helping but not surrendering. And I knew I had made the right choice. The weeks passed, and I settled into a new rhythm. Every afternoon, I drove to Rodney's house to check on the kids, make sure they were fed, and help them keep the house from falling apart. But every night, without fail, I packed up my purse, kissed them goodbye, and drove back to my little apartment. It wasn't easy at first. Caleb cried the first few evenings, begging me to stay. Elsie would hold onto my hand and plead for one more story. I reassured them gently, promising I'd be back after school, but I made it clear I wasn't sleeping over anymore. That boundary was firm, and the longer I kept it, the more natural it felt. Instead of doing everything myself, I started teaching them to do for themselves. I showed Sophie how to cook a simple dinner. One night, we made scrambled eggs and toast. She cracked the eggs, careful not to get shells in the bowl, and smiled when she flipped them without breaking. That wasn't so hard, she said proudly. Exactly. I told her, you don't need to wait for me. You're capable of more than you realize. Dylan, at 11, was old enough to handle laundry. I showed him how to sort colors from whites, measure detergent, and set the cycle. At first, he groaned. Why do I have to do this? But when he pulled out a pile of clean shirts and folded them himself, I could see the pride on his face, even if he tried to hide it. Caleb took on smaller jobs, setting the table, feeding the dog, picking up toys from the floor. And little Elsie, just 6, learned to put her crayons back in a box instead of scattering them across the living room. It wasn't perfect. The eggs were sometimes runny, and the folded laundry wasn't neat. The dog got fed twice some days, and not at all others. But the important thing was that they were learning. They were stepping into roles their parents had avoided. Meanwhile, Rodney and Rosemary drifted further into the background. Rodney came home late, dropped his boots at the door, and sank into the recliner without asking how things had gone. Rosemary was still stuck on bed rest, but instead of calling to check on the kids, she called me to complain about how bored she was at the hospital. The frustration ate at me. One evening, after helping Sophie finish her homework and packing up leftovers for the fridge, I found Rodney scrolling on his phone while the sink overflowed with dirty dishes. Rodney, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, the kids are taking on chores. They need to see you do your part too. He barely looked up. I'm tired, Mom. I work all day. So do I. I replied quietly. He didn't answer, and I didn't push it further. I knew better than to expect gratitude now. Instead, I poured my energy into the children. The more I showed them, the more they opened up to me in ways they never had before. One evening, after Sophie successfully cooked spaghetti for her brothers and sister, she pulled me aside. Grandma, she said, her eyes shining, I didn't think I could do this. But you believed I could. I squeezed her hand. That's all it takes, sweetheart. Someone to believe in you. Dylan surprised me too. After a few weeks of managing laundry, he started doing it without me reminding him. One night, as I was leaving, he handed me a neatly folded stack of towels. Look, Grandma, I did these on my own. I smiled so wide it hurt. I'm proud of you, Dylan. Caleb began to take pride in setting the table, arranging forks and napkins like it was an art project. Elsie, once quick to whine, started tidying up her toys without a fuss. Small steps, but steps forward. The bond between us deepened, not because I was doing everything for them, but because I was teaching them to stand on their own. I could see it in their eyes. They felt capable, trusted, grown. And I felt lighter, no longer crushed under the weight of carrying it all. Still, I couldn't ignore the anger that simmered when I thought about Rodney and Rosemary. They should have been the ones guiding these kids, showing them how to cook, fold laundry, and take responsibility. Instead, they left it to me, and when I stepped back, they left it to the kids themselves. But then I'd look at Sophie stirring a pot on the stove or Dylan proudly loading the washer, and I'd remind myself that even if their parents weren't showing up, I was giving them something better, tools to take care of themselves. One night, after tucking Elsie into bed, I stood at the door with Sophie. She hugged me tightly and whispered, "Grandma, you're the only one who makes us feel safe." My throat tightened. I kissed the top of her head and said softly, "I'll always love you, but part of loving you is teaching you to be strong without me always here." When I drove home that night, I rolled down the window and let the cool air wash over me. For once, I didn't feel guilty leaving them behind. I knew I'd given them what I could, knowledge, confidence, the assurance that someone believed in them. And I knew something else, too. I was showing them love without losing myself. 3 months passed faster than I thought they would. By the time summer gave way to fall, Rosemary's pregnancy had run its course. She delivered a baby boy, healthy but early, and the hospital kept her a few extra days for observation. Rodney called me the morning she gave birth, his voice tired but proud. I went to visit once, mostly for the kids' sake. Sophie wanted to see her new brother, and I didn't want her to go alone. The baby was tiny, swaddled in a blue blanket, and Rosemary looked worn but pleased. Rodney hovered by the bed, trying to act in control, but looking more overwhelmed than I'd ever seen him. The visit didn't last long. I congratulated them, kissed the baby's forehead, and took Sophie home. On the drive back, she was quiet until she finally said, "Grandma, things are going to be harder now, aren't they?" I kept my eyes on the road. They'll be different, but that's for your parents to figure out. When Rosemary came home from the hospital, life inside their house grew even more chaotic. The baby cried through the night. Rodney scrambled to keep up with work, and the bills started piling higher. One evening, Sophie confided in me that the electricity had been close to shut off until Rodney borrowed money from a friend. In the past, I would have stepped in immediately. I would have written a check, covered the bills, and carried the stress on my shoulders. But this time, I didn't. My 3 months were up, and I meant what I said. I still picked up groceries now and then, or slipped Sophie a little money for school supplies, but I did not dive back into their world full time. When the phone rang late at night, I let it go to voicemail. When Rodney asked if I could keep the baby overnight, just this once, I told him no. It wasn't easy. I still love those kids fiercely. The thought of them struggling tugged at me every day. But I reminded myself that loving them didn't mean sacrificing myself. If Rodney and Rosemary chose to bring another child into the world, they had to face the responsibility that came with it. Meanwhile, my own life began to blossom in ways I hadn't expected. I applied for a part-time receptionist job at the senior center and was hired within a week. It wasn't glamorous, but it gave me purpose. I met people my age, shared coffee during breaks, and even joined a group that played cards every Friday afternoon. I returned to my quilting circle at church, too. The first time I walked into that room with fabric tucked under my arm, the women clapped and said, "Welcome back, Virginia." I hadn't realized how much I missed it until I threaded my needle and fell back into the rhythm of stitching and talking. On Saturdays, Doris and I joined the walking club around the park. Some mornings we went slow, stopping to sit on benches and watch the ducks in the pond. Other days, we pushed each other to go a little farther. My body ached, but in a good way, the way that reminds you you're alive. At home, I filled my evenings with small joys. I planted geraniums in pots on my balcony, read through the stack of novels I'd left untouched, and even started a scrapbook with photos of the grandchildren. The kids and I stayed connected. Sophie called me most nights, even if just for 5 minutes. Dylan texted me pictures of his basketball games. Caleb mailed me a drawing of the dog with the words "Best Grandma" scrawled across the top. And little Elsie loved video chats, holding the baby up to the camera so I could see him wiggle. I still sent what I could, $20 here, $50 there, to help with school needs, but never more than I could afford. I no longer poured out everything I had until nothing was left for me. Looking back, I realized something important. I had finally found balance. I could be present for my grandchildren without being consumed by their parents' choices. I could give love without losing myself. One evening, sitting on my balcony with the sun sinking low, I thought about the journey I'd been on. From the moment Rodney and Rosemary announced that 5th pregnancy, I'd felt trapped. But now, months later, I felt free. I whispered to myself, I raised my son. It was never my job to raise his. I'll always love my grandkids, but love is not the same as surrender. And that's what I want you to think about as you listen to my story. Have you ever reached that point where love meant setting boundaries? What would you have done if you were me? If my story touched you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Share your experience in the comments. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Your support helps keep these stories alive. Thank you for listening.